Imagine surviving a devastating drought
Yeah.
by promising to give away 10% of your town's well water forever.
Right.
You survive the current crisis, sure. But, I mean, you have permanently changed your ability to water your own crops in the future.
Yeah, that is a steep price.
It really is. And welcome to today's deep analysis, because we are looking at a situation playing out at one of the biggest technology companies on the planet that fits that exact description.
It perfectly fits, yeah.
Recently, Samsung averted a historic strike by agreeing to this groundbreaking union pay deal. By doing so, they kept their factories running. But, they also opened up a completely new, incredibly rigid financial reality that threatens to, well, rewrite the entire future of South Korea's corporate world.
It really does. And this is a massive shift that you need to pay attention to, whether you work in tech, invest in the market, or, just rely on a smartphone.
Right.
We are not just analyzing some human resources dispute at a distant company here. We are looking at the literal hardware foundation that powers the global artificial intelligence boom.
The actual physical stuff.
Exactly. This affects the supply chains feeding NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google. But beneath the silicon, this story reveals a fundamental shift in how human talent is valued. We're watching what happens in real time when the people building the architecture of the future realize the sheer amount of leverage they actually hold.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, averting a strike sounds like a straightforward victory for management.
Casually, yeah.
The factories stay open, the shipments go out, investors stay happy. But the actual mechanics of how they bought this labor piece are pretty much unprecedented. Let's look at the anatomy of the deal that stopped this 18-day strike.
Sure. So Samsung agreed to give workers in its semiconductor division, which is known as the DS division, a fixed 10.5% share of the operating profit. Right. And that's paid out in company stock.
10.5%.
Right. They also implemented an average 6.2% baseline salary increase. But the real structural change here is that they completely removed the old bonus cap.
And that's a huge deal, right?
Yeah, it is. That removed cap changes the entire incentive structure. Under the old system, management could cap special bonuses at 50% of a worker's base salary.
Yeah.
They could essentially say, you had a record-breaking year, here's your reward, but we are pulling the parachute at 50%.
Wow.
Yeah. But with that ceiling gone, if the semiconductor division generates astronomical profits driven by the AI boom, the workers are guaranteed an astronomical, completely uncapped piece of that pie.
Right.
But the most critical detail of this entire agreement comes down to two specific words, and that is operating profit.
Yeah, and I'm stuck on this operating profit detail. Because if I am an executive or like the chief financial officer of a global conglomerate, tying bonuses to operating profit rather than net profit seems like financial malpractice.
It definitely sounds risky.
Right. For the listener who might not look at corporate balance sheets every day, operating profit is the money you make before you pay your taxes, before you pay the interest on your corporate debt, and, before other final corporate deductions.
Exactly.
It's like an actor negotiating a percentage of the gross box office revenue before the studio even pays for the marketing or the theater distribution.
Right, the Tom Cruise deal.
Exactly. The actor gets paid off the top, and the studio is left hoping there's enough left over to keep the lights on. So why on earth would management agree to give away a fixed percentage of the money before the actual bills are paid?
Well, it creates an enormous cost challenge, which is why executives usually fight tooth and nail to avoid it.
Yeah.
Net profit is the safe metric because it's what is left over after the reality of running the business actually sets in. Giving workers a fixed claim on operating profit means labor takes their cut, while the company still carries the risk of all those downstream financial obligations.
Right, the debt and the taxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Samsung did not make this choice in a vacuum. They were backed into a corner by a combination of a fierce domestic rival and the explosion of a fundamentally new technology.
Which brings us to SK Hynix, because Samsung is the titan, right? Historically, they have dictated the rules of corporate Korea, they established the benchmarks, and everyone else just follows.
That's how it's always been, yeah.
But here, they were forced into a defensive posture, and the company holding their feet to the fire was their biggest domestic competitor. SK Hynix had already abandoned the old rules.
They had. SK Hynix abolished their own bonus cap first. And more importantly, they agreed to give their workers a 10% operating profit allocation.
Oh, Okay.
So when Samsung set their number at 10.5%, they were not being exceptionally generous. They were essentially just matching the new market rate established by their
So
rival.
they were just keeping up.
Exactly. And to understand why SK Hynix felt compelled to offer that deal in the first place, we really have to look at the technology driving the entire AI market right now. It all comes down to HBM.
High bandwidth memory.
Yes.
For the listener, how does HBM actually differ from the traditional memory chips we've had in our computers for years?
Okay, so traditional memory, like standard DRAM or NAND, is somewhat like a standard cargo train.
Okay.
It moves data back and forth reliably, but there's a strict limit to how much it can carry at once. High bandwidth memory, or HBM, is physically different. It involves vertically stacking multiple memory chips on top of each other and connecting them with these microscopic wires.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is less like printing a circuit and more like building a microscopic skyscraper. HBM acts as a high-speed bullet train that plugs directly into the AI processor.
And for AI, I mean, speed is everything.
It's the only thing that matters. If the memory cannot feed data to the AI processor fast enough, the processor just sits idle.
Yeah.
And SK Hynix figured out how to build these microscopic skyscrapers incredibly efficiently, giving them a massive early lead in the market.
And building those structures, I mean, that requires highly specialized human beings. You can't just buy the machines and press a button.
Right.
You need the minds that actually know how to run them.
That is the core of the issue. You need process specialists, incredibly fast research and development teams, and specifically yield experts.
Yield experts.
Right. Yield is basically the batting average of a semiconductor factory. It is the percentage of usable chips you can successfully extract from a single silicon wafer.
Okay.
Because HBM is vertically stacked, if one layer of that microscopic skyscraper is defective, the entire stack is ruined.
Oh, man. So the stakes are huge.
Massive. So if your yield drops even a few percentage points, it costs the company billions of dollars. Samsung was watching their elite yield engineers and R&D specialists get pulled toward SK Hynix because of that uncapped 10% operating profit bonus structure.
Ah, I see.
If Samsung loses that specific institutional knowledge, they risk falling permanently behind in the AI hardware race.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't just a labor dispute anymore. It is a full-blown brain drain war. Samsung realized that matching SK Hynix's compensation was the only way to stop their elite engineers from defecting. But while they successfully plugged the hole and kept their memory experts in-house, they accidentally ignited a massive internal fire within their own walls.
They really did. We have to look at the unintended consequences of this. The agreement was approved by roughly 74% of the more than 62,000 workers who voted.
Which sounds good, right?
On paper, yeah, a 74% approval rating looks like a solid consensus. But the reality inside the company's walls is a story of extreme wealth disparity between different divisions.
Yeah, let's look at the actual numbers, because they are staggering. Driven by this AI supercycle, workers in the DS division, the memory chip division, could see life-changing payouts. We're talking about projections of up to roughly $416,000 per person.
It's incredible.
That is about 567 million Korean won, just in bonuses. But then you walk across the corporate campus to the DX division. These are the teams manufacturing the smartphones, the televisions, the home appliances.
Right.
Their projected bonus is sitting at around $4,400, or 6 million won.
So you are looking at a $400,000 difference in compensation between employees working for the exact same parent company.
Imagine being in the same band, but the lead singer gets millions while the drummer gets standard scale. Even though the drummer carried the band through all the tough years.
That's a great way to put it.
But I'll play devil's advocate for a moment here. If I'm an executive, shouldn't the DX division just accept that they didn't write the hit song this year? I mean, the AI memory division is generating the massive profits, so they get the massive rewards. Why should management care if the consumer electronics team feels left out?
Well, because a global conglomerate relies on cross-subsidization to survive.
What do you mean by that?
The semiconductor market is notoriously volatile. In 2023, the memory chip market suffered a severe downturn. Prices just crashed.
Right.
During that period, it was the steady, reliable cash flow from the DX division people buying phones and refrigerators that kept Samsung afloat and funded the very research that allowed the memory division to develop their AI chips.
Oh, wow.
So the DX workers have a highly valid frustration. They carried the company through the bust, but now that the boom is here, they are structurally excluded from the windfall.
This changes the entire nature of the labor dynamic. We are no longer just looking at labor versus management. We are looking at labor versus labor.
What's fascinating here is exactly that. When you link compensation so rigidly to divisional operating profit in a cyclical market, you engineer internal resentment.
Yeah, you pit them against each other.
Exactly. Management is forced to appease the memory chip workers to keep them away from rivals, while simultaneously trying to prevent a complete collapse in morale among the consumer electronics workers.
And if this formula creates this much internal tension inside one company, the implications for the broader South Korean economy are profound. South Korea's corporate structure is built on a foundation that this deal just took a sledgehammer to. We are talking about the Chaebol system.
We are.
For the listener who might not be deeply familiar with South Korean economics, how did the Chaebol system historically handle worker compensation?
So, chaebols are massive, family-controlled conglomerates that largely rebuilt the South Korean economy after the Korean War.
Okay.
Culturally and historically, they operate on a very paternalistic model. They provided lifetime employment and stability, but in exchange, management maintained strict, top-down control over compensation.
So the bosses just decided.
Right. Bonuses were largely discretionary. Management evaluated the year, evaluated the broader economic conditions, and decided from the top down what the bonuses would be. The workers trusted the executives to distribute the wealth appropriately.
But with this new deal, Samsung, which is the largest and most influential chaebol, has totally abandoned that discretionary power. They put a fixed, mathematically rigid formula tied directly to operating profit in writing.
You did.
They essentially handed over the playbook to every other union in the country. Now, workers in the auto industry, in shipbuilding, and across other tech sectors have a clear template. They can walk into their own negotiations, point to the Samsung deal, and ask, well, why not us?
And it creates a textbook contagion effect. The entire South Korean labor market could shift toward a model where workers demand a direct, fixed, and legally binding share of corporate earnings.
Which is a huge shift.
Absolutely. Interestingly, though, investors actually cheered this deal in the short term.
Yeah.
When the union approved the agreement, Samsung's stock surged roughly 6 to 8%.
Wall Street generally hates uncertainty more than anything else. Averting an 18-day strike meant the global AI supply chain wouldn't be disrupted.
Yes, and avoiding disruption is critical because semiconductor production lines operate on absolute precision. You can't just hit pause.
Right.
If you shut down an advanced fabrication plant, you cannot simply flip a switch to turn it back on. The calibration required for these machines takes weeks.
Oh, wow.
A shutdown destroys your yield and delays your product roadmaps for months. So avoiding that specific disaster was a massive relief to investors. But this introduces a severe long-term financial risk that executives are currently losing sleep over.
This is where the rigid labor costs collide with the reality of hardware cycles. The AI boom is incredibly hot right now, and profits are surging. But the semiconductor market always fluctuates.
Always.
So what happens when the AI boom eventually normalizes, or when memory prices crash due to oversupply? What happens to a company that is legally locked into paying out a fixed percentage of operating profits?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when the cycle weakens, margins naturally shrink. But because the precedent of this uncapped pay structure has been set, your labor costs remain relatively rigid.
That rigidity eats directly into your retained earnings. And in the semiconductor business, retained earnings are not just a rainy day fund. They are the lifeblood of your future. You need billions of dollars in cash on hand for capital expenditures, or CapEx.
We are talking about the cost of building tomorrow's infrastructure. Purchasing next-generation equipment like EUV lithography machines.
Exact.
For the listener, EUV stands for extreme ultraviolet. These are machines that cost hundreds of millions of dollars each, and they use massive arrays of mirrors to print microscopic circuits using light. It's wild technology.
It really is.
But if a company spends its cash reserves appeasing labor during a boom, they won't have the money to buy the EUV machines needed for the next generation of chips.
And if rigid labor costs consume the cash meant for CapEx, the company fundamentally falls behind technologically. You cannot innovate if you do not have the capital to invest in the next node of manufacturing.
You just stagnate.
Right. Management is now walking an incredibly precarious tightrope.
So what does this all mean? How does a company actually survive this new reality without cannibalizing its own future? Because you cannot unring the bell of this union deal. The expectations are set. What does a practical, dynamic, profit-sharing model actually look like to fix this?
Surviving this requires balancing 3 competing pillars flawlessly. First, retaining elite talent against rivals. Second, protecting financial margins to fund capex. And third, maintaining internal harmony between divisions.
That sounds nearly impossible.
It's definitely hard. To do this, companies will likely need to move away from isolated division-by-division metrics and develop cross-divisional profit-sharing models.
What would that look like in practice? I mean, how do you reward the memory team without alienating the smartphone team?
One approach is implementing a rolling multi-year average for bonuses.
Okay.
Instead of paying out based purely on a single year's operating profit, the bonus pool could be calculated on a 3-year trailing average. This smooths out the cyclical booms and busts.
Ah, I see.
During an AI supercycle, the payout is still massive, but a portion of that cash is retained to bolster the payouts during a downturn. Another solution is matrix-based compensation.
Meaning you tie the divisions together financially.
Exactly. You structure the compensation so that a percentage of the DS division's bonus is dependent on the DX division hitting their targets, and vice versa.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, you create a quote-unquote one-company fund where a small fraction of all divisional operating profit goes into a shared pool, which is then distributed equally across the entire workforce.
Right.
This ensures the elite engineers are heavily rewarded for their specific breakthroughs, but the baseline workers who provide the company's financial stability still participate in the windfall. It mitigates that deep, culture-rotting resentment.
But it requires an entirely new level of transparency and agility from management. Yeah. I mean, the old chaebol culture of opaque top-down compensation is basically dead.
It is.
Going forward, executives will have to justify their financial models to the workforce in real time.
It is a monumental operational shift. Management has to prove to the workers that retaining cash for capital expenditures is in the workers' long-term best interests, because without those new machines, there are no future profits to share.
Samsung ultimately bought their short-term labor piece. They kept their production lines running, they stopped their elite engineers from defecting, and they protected their position in the global AI hardware race.
They did.
But the price of that piece was accepting a radically changed, structurally rigid compensation model that will undoubtedly ripple across the entire South Korean economy.
Looking toward the future, this deal clarifies the defining characteristic of the AI era. We spend the vast majority of our time talking about computing power, electricity grids, and silicon constraints.
Yeah.
We treat the machines as the precious resource. But the ultimate bottleneck is human intelligence. Samsung formally accepted a brand new balance of power. The elite tech workers, the yield specialists, the R&D engineers, they now hold the keys to the global hardware kingdom, and they finally know exactly what those keys are worth.
They bought the water today, but gave away the well for tomorrow. It changes every calculation moving forward. So, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. As artificial intelligence continues to make corporations exponentially richer, generating wealth on a scale we have barely begun to comprehend, who truly deserves the vast majority of that windfall? Is it the machines executing the processing, the executives risking the capital, or the elite engineers whose minds make the entire system possible? Keep that in mind the next time you see a massive tech breakthrough hit the news. Thank you for joining us for today's Deep Analysis. We will see you next time.